So I want to start with letting you know what GPRO at Work is. It's a new training and coaching program that Urban Green started about 2-3 years ago. And it's meant to work with facility teams to reduce their energy consumption and carbon emissions through the lens of training and process improvement. So Urban Green's been offering GPRO O&M training since 2010. So, we have a good track record by this point. And in every class I've ever attended or taught, somebody in the class will always say, like, why are you talking to us? You should talk to the people with the money, because our audience was the facility managers, the building operators, the folks who run the equipment. So we did that. We started this coaching program, and a requirement to participate is that representatives from each department in the organization need to participate. So Weill Cornell Medicine was a very good fit for this program because they already had a solid management team. They were committed to staff training. The staff was already enthusiastic about training and had a very strong interest in energy efficiency. What was missing was that they needed a more systematic approach to be able to harness the power of their internal experience. And this particular program was funded by NYSERDA under PON 3715, to which we are very grateful because we were really able to experiment with some things. So in a second, I'm going to introduce Mike Murphy and Angela Moo from the Weill Cornell Medicine Engineering and Maintenance Department Management Team. Mike will provide some of the background about the facility, and then Angela will present about the energy results and some of the work that the team did. The best part is that Angela's going to take you on a video tour of the amazing Learning Lab, but I'll say nothing else, so you'll be surprised. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mike Murphy, who's the Senior Director of Engineering and Maintenance at Weill Cornell Medicine. Mike has a mechanical engineering background with 25 years experience in construction and facilities management. And Angela Moo, the energy manager of Weill Cornell Medicine, she manages all the energy use of the Weill Cornell Medicine's Upper East Side campus, which is approximately 2 million square feet of medical research, education, and clinical space. So as Caitlin mentioned earlier, we're gonna have time for questions at after the presentation. So please add your questions throughout in the Q&A box and vote up other questions. So with that, Mike, take it away.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks, Ellen, and hello to everybody. It's great to see a lot of familiar names out there. Let me just go to the next slide, please, Caitlin. So just a quick background of Weill Cornell Medicine. Weill Cornell Medicine is the medical school for Cornell University. The medical school was founded in 1898, about 35 years after Cornell University itself opened its doors. Weill Cornell Medicine moved to its current main campus Upper East Side location back in 1932. And I use this photo a lot. I just love it. It's when you look at this photo, the sort of white land of Oz there is the NYP/Weill Cornell campus back in the late 30s. And it's just such a contrast to the surrounding area. Weill Cornell does have affiliations with a variety of hospitals, the most prominent of which is our sort of neighbor, New York Presbyterian Hospital. And the tripartite mission here is medical education, patient care, and medical research. Next slide. We currently own or lease space in upwards of 39 different locations within the New York City area, and this totals to approximately 2.8 million gross square feet. Next slide. Just the next few slides that we're going to be going over, just to sort of give you more of an overview of the Department of Engineering and Maintenance at Weill Cornell, which will hopefully start to set the stage for why we welcome the partnership with Urban Green and NYSERDA to help us stay on course and continue to drive our operation forward. There are 11 core business units within Weill Cornell Engineering and Maintenance. Our primary focus for this GPRO Work coaching program was the physical plant, the service mechanic team, the electrical team, and our controls and energy teams. And the reason they were our initial focus, because they're constantly customer facing, first and foremost, and then also they do have the greatest impact on our operations in terms of driving our energy footprint. Next slide. Anybody working in the facilities management industry can agree that each day and a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety at times, but that's life. But in addition to the sort of day-to-day unknowns, I think there's two drivers here at Weill Cornell that's really kind of added to the complexity of our physical plant and the operations. The first is sort of our ever-changing campus footprint. Our campus has doubled just in the past 13 years alone. This slide shows its growth over 20 years, but just sort of with the onboarding of our Wall Greenberg Center back in 2012, that was the start of even just doubling our campus footprint from that point. And we increased our footprint. As we increase our footprint, we're always increasing our facilities team, and that alone brings challenges, right? So how do you grow your team, and how do you still maintain a very consistent service model? Another complexity driver is how the software-based solutions and associated hardware components have really become part of the facilities management industry and the management world. And each year brings a new type of software system to us. And the bottom of the slide just lists just a few examples that apply here at Weill Cornell. And while these systems are in place to assist with a high quality and high performing building operation, they also require us to revisit the skill set and training approach for our own team. On the top of this slide, we just have a definition from ASHRAE on what a high performance building is. And the sort of two areas I underline are just, a consistently delivering a highly productive building. I mean, just think about that, a highly productive campus. And that's just the message we're always trying to get across to our team. And then also just the knowledge and awareness on part of both the operators and the maintenance technicians. And they kind of separated here in the definition, but here at Weill Cornell, those two folks are often the same person. So, next slide. This slide just sort of shows a typical year in our work order system. We call it the maintenance management system. And in a typical year here in calendar year 2019, as an example, there's over 30,000 individual transactions within our maintenance management system. Roughly 60% of those are for preventative maintenance tasks, and the remaining 40% are customer-based service type calls or requests. The two darkest slices here, the HVAC and the electrical, they make up about 80% of these transactions, which is why they were an obvious first choice for including in our focus group for this program. Okay. The next two slides are just going to highlight some of the areas we recognize that we needed to revisit if we were going to stay ahead of the curve with respect to our campus, our ever-increasing regulatory requirements, and our heavily IT-based facility systems. One area or a couple areas that we've struggled with were staffing levels and then just the New York City hiring environment. You may have enough positions budgeted, but if your vacancies stay idle for an extended period of time, it's just obviously going to put a strain on your team. And that has been the case here for us at Weill Cornell. And I also think it's a natural instinct for supervisors. They tend to fall back to their sort of go-to sort of rock stars, but that's not a sustainable model. So we recognized that we needed a system that was going to keep raising the bar and sort of keep closing the sort of skill gap that maybe we were experiencing within our own shops. And then by doing that, if we can address our technical sort of needs within, which is one of the goals, it would really kind of open up the candidate pool for us. So we can kind of focus on other sort of aspects of a person, personality fits, relevant educational and frankly, background experience. But if we can onboard the sort of technical component there and bring it in-house, it would really kind of alleviate and open up our candidate pool. Next slide. So in terms of training here, the current environment that prior to this sort of grant it's very heavily, we have tons of human resource trainings, as anybody would imagine in a large institution or a large company. Lots of environmental and safety training and workplace regulatory compliance, in our case, HIPAA training and things like that. And these trainings can combine, take up 25 plus hours a year of somebody's time, an individual's time. So we have a robust tuition reimbursement package in place as well, but many do take advantage of that, but many do not. And that was kind of being left up to the sort of individual to sort of show the initiative. So we just need to shift our focus to a more technical training program that was going to have sort of more of a higher hit rate internally. And then, this slide really just summarizes the sort of areas of focus that we needed to sort of address and why we partnered with Urban Green on this. And I think the next coming slides or groups of slides, the next slides coming our way here are really going to kind of zero in on these things. Things just expanding our good fit applicant pool. We talked about that briefly, upskilling. We don't really have a slide, but I just want to bring up the point, just think about who you're partnering with, right? Your consultant partnerships, right? Are your consultants pushing for high performance buildings? Are you learning from them? Use your consultants as an opportunity, as a training opportunity for your own team. And then we'll talk more about the building performance and data-based items in the next coming slides. So I think that's it for me at the moment.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about our training program now. As Ellen mentioned, we began it because of a wonderful NYSERDA grant, 3715. The point of this grant was to help building owners reduce energy usage by training their workforce in ways that had real staying power. And the grant was wonderfully flexible to the applicant's vision. It was a competitive grant process, and we partnered with Urban Green on it. So thanks to Ellen and everyone's help, we were able to put together a really strong proposal that was awarded funding in the fall of 2018. Now, our goals going in were three-part. One, we wanted to build a framework for a structured training program. Two, we wanted to put our people through a lot of technical training. And three, we wanted to build a strong energy culture in our department. And at the end of the day, we hoped that by doing these three things, our engineering and maintenance department would improve the way we operate and maintain our buildings, and we'd achieve real energy savings. Next slide. So the first thing we had to do was we had to evaluate where our team stood at the beginning. In terms of a training program, as Mike mentioned earlier, we had a tuition reimbursement program. We already did a bunch of trainings, and we sent folks to trainings who were proactive about asking for it. But we didn't have consistent training expectations for everyone, and we didn't have ways to track the trainings. And we were starting to experience broad skills gaps within the teams. So that's where we stood in terms of a formal training program. Now, to evaluate the technical skills and energy culture side of it, Urban Green helped us develop a set of surveys for the team. There was an anonymous culture survey that helped us get a sense of how people felt about training, how they preferred to learn, if they had ideas for how to operate equipment more efficiently on campus. And through this, we learned that most folks preferred hands-on training style. So this was validation for the training center that we plan to build later that I'll talk about in a few slides. We learned that people felt that training was extremely important to the way they do their jobs, but we also learned that less than 60% of staff had ever previously requested any training. And also 20% of the respondents said that they didn't know who to go to with their energy savings ideas, which was kind of a shock for me because I was the one delivering the surveys. So, you know, what I took away from that was that even though I had been interacting with the managers of the teams for a few years, you know, maybe I wasn't interacting enough with the staff, and maybe some of the energy discussions hadn't really penetrated to the staff level. And so that was the culture survey. The other survey we did was the skills survey, and that one had name attributions because we asked people what training topics they were interested in signing up for. And at the same time, we also interviewed the supervisors at each of the shops to get their feedback on their team's technical training skills. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of some of the survey results that Urban Green helped us compile. It's actually a much larger spreadsheet. It extends way off the page. There are a lot more columns, and you'll see at the bottom there are also a lot of tabs. But to summarize some of the major takeaways from the surveys, the number one type of training suggested by everyone was controls training, software training, either building management system trainings or lighting controls trainings. And a lot of folks asked for both. After that, the next most popular style of training was various trainings on specific equipments or HVAC systems or troubleshooting trainings. Next. Okay, so after we got a sense of where our baseline stood and what people were interested in, we started signing people up for trainings. And this was really challenging because a lot of the trainings were multi-day, and we were trying to send everyone to at least one. But at the same time, we had to ensure coverage on campus. So this was a really big effort by everyone. And the pie chart on the right shows the split. Our grant reimbursed $106,000 for out-of-pocket expenses. We spent about half of it, that lighting lab and that HVAC lab portion, to build the training center. And then the rest of it was spent mostly on controls trainings, that light gray, and lighting controls trainings down at the bottom. Then the rest of the reimbursed trainings were an assortment of HVAC and electrical trainings. And in addition to the reimbursed trainings, we had an Urban Green GPRO class to teach green buildings fundamentals. We had a previous class in 2016, and this additional class of 13 was really meant to include the people who weren't able to participate in the first one because they were out on vacations, and any new staff. We also created a series of in-house trainings, and Urban Green helped us create a nice branded template presentation for any future trainings we created. And all of these in-house trainings now reside in a library online. So when you add all of this up, 22 multi-day BMS trainings, 3 lighting control systems trainings, GPRO training, in-house training, all of these, we spent over 800 hours just attending trainings, you know, not including the time to manage this whole process or to travel or anything like that. So really an incredible amount of time. All right, now for the fun part. So I want to show our awesome training lab, and I'm going to take over the screen. Let's see if this works. So quick shout out to our partners at Loring who helped us make this cool 3D model. Is this showing up for everyone? Let me know if not. Okay,
Yes.
great. All right, so meet our training lab, AKA, you know, this is our training center. We call it the training lab. So we built this room for a bunch of different reasons. The first is we didn't have a dedicated space for training before. We're kind of squeezing into small conference rooms, and those aren't great learning environments. The second is for onboarding new staff. So new staff who are trying to learn our controllers and our equipment, we're really just having to learn on the job. And they were learning in real time while working on real issues, real work orders. And so, you know, they're up in dusty ceilings, working in the dark. There's a frustrated researcher 5 feet away, worrying about their grant deadline. So that's not a great learning environment. Whereas here we have this nice, calm, quiet, well-lit space where new staff can go. It's got a lot of the representative equipment that we have on our campus, and they can learn and they can experiment and really take their time in an unpressured space. And, you know, if they break something in this room, it's 100% okay. That's what it's for. It's here to learn. So that's really something that we try to emphasize. And this room was meant to simulate a wet lab, one of the more complex HVAC environments on campus. So you can see in the back, I'll show you in a second, there's a fume hood here. But let's start with HVAC. So wet laboratories tend to get complicated because they have pressurization requirements. They're almost always negative pressure, and that's a new concept to onboarding staff. So to simulate it, we have a line of supply and exhaust ductwork, each with 2 sets of VAV controllers. And that's because we have 2 main building management systems that we use on campus, and we wanted to train on both. These are real controllers with functioning dampers and actuated components and sensors that are connected to real BMS panels in the room. And the nice thing is people can get to this equipment pretty easily. We have this ladder that they can just kind of wheel over to whatever they want to check out to access those components. And in addition, we have a fume hood. So this is a real fume hood that was getting decommissioned in the building, and we salvaged it for this room. It's connected to a functioning fume hood controller, and there's an exhaust fan on the other side of the wall that we can turn on and simulate fume hood exhaust flow. So this is a space where our environmental health and safety department can come and give us trainings on fume hood safety and flow velocity measurements, and where we can have trainings on fume hood controllers. Next is lighting. Our most complex lighting system is a Lutron quantum system. So that's what we installed here. We've got 2 rows of lights, 1 linear and 1 troffer style. And 1 row is on a simple relay and 1 is dimming capable. There's also an occupancy sensor, and everything's connected to the Lutron panels in the corner. We also have these bulbs and these porcelain holders. That's to simulate daylight for this daylight sensor. And in the corner, we have an operable window shade. So we pretty much have one of everything. We can do trainings on how to program schedules, how daylighting works, how to adjust it. We can create different zones with these 2 rows of lights. We can train on operable window shades, occupancy sensor functionality, demand response, everything, you name it. And the lighting controls and the BMS systems are all accessible from these 3 workstations. And for group trainings, we have this lovely large screen. So this is a really creative space. We've had a lot of trainings in here already for onboarding. We did an in-house wet vac training, a plumbing clog training. We've had engineering consultants present in this room. These days it looks a little different. We've had to kind of pause the use of this room because of COVID, but hopefully in the fall we can start using this room again and hosting group trainings again. So I'll stop sharing here. I believe next is Mike.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Angela. Sorry, I'm a little. So this, data, right? How do you use data, and how do you use data to drive your operational decisions? So I think that's what we accomplished with this, and I'll talk about it, and then also we'll talk on the next slide about time saving. This just highlights one area where we wanted to go back and revisit an existing system and how we were using it, and how could we change how we're using it and use it more to our advantage. In this case, like I said, data. So this is just a executive dashboard from our maintenance management system. And we wanted to start mining and using this data buried within the system. And we wanted this data to be at the fingertips for each supervisor, to help them sort of determine, in this case, the amount of work orders somebody has in their current, how many, what's their current work level, and who's maybe, this could point out potentially a performance issue. It could point out potentially an overload condition with a technician. And it also sort of gives them a sort of just a better understanding of how their shop's operating on a regular basis. So this went over really well. This picture here actually represents 51 different reports running in the background. And it's every time this supervisor, this shop logs in, it's on their homepage. This is the first thing they see every morning, every afternoon when they log into that system. So that's just kind of using data to our advantage. Next slide. And then also, how do we adjust for time? Angela referenced, I think 800 plus hours of training in this program to date. How do we save that up? So one of the programs we kind of embraced was sort of a handheld device rollout with our field technicians. And we have 50 of these out in the field over the past 2 years. And each technician carries around an iPad with a shoulder strap and a sort of robust, durable case, very, very little breakage, I'm happy to say. And it puts in their fingertips quicker and continuous access capability for their work order information, the customer contact information. So from a customer service point of view, it's great. Real-time closeout capability of work orders, which then triggers an email to the customer kind of in the same day. Prior to this, we were very paper-driven. We were very paper-processed. So if you can imagine on an earlier slide, I mentioned over 30,000 transactions a year. That's 30,000 sheets of paper. It's just absurd. All that just goes away with this. They also can access BMS systems. So there's no need to go back and forth to the shop, to the fact client that's sitting up in the shop and adjusting, and then going back to the space where you're troubleshooting the temperature. They do it all right there in the field. And that's frankly a time saver. That's a time saver. We estimate that this program saves us about 45 minutes a day in back and forth time per technician. And we think that more than offsets the time that we're spending on this additional sort of in-house technical training program. And then finally, we're growing with this. So the next thing we're planning on giving them is file share access to sort of O&M manuals, that kind of thing. And then some shops are currently using it to email and video conference with team meetings, that kind of thing, and sort of the COVID era. Next slide. And this slide really just to sort of drive home that there is some structure, there's some technical structure into our training program. So this is just sort of a couple of sections I pulled out of a pretty extensive spreadsheet. It doesn't represent the whole. We're still kind of ironing out how we're tracking all of this training moving forward. So we are currently tracking training through our maintenance management system. We create an actual work order ticket. That's great because you can go back and do an annual report on somebody and kind of see all the trainings they took. But they can also account for their time, right? So, in an institution where you're stressing to a technician that they have to account for the 7 or 8 hours a day, and they go to 3 hours of training, give them a work order, and we can track that through our maintenance management system. But what we're doing with this spreadsheet here is we actually created a unique spreadsheet for each shop. So each supervisor has it as a tool in front of them, and there's a unique tab for each of their technicians. So they can have that conversation with them as to, the trainings you've completed over the last few years, and what would be a good next step in the technical training world for you moving forward. And then also help the supervisors to sort of incorporate some of this into the annual appraisal process. Next slide.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. So Mike covered a lot of the improvements we made to our training program and our department processes. And earlier I covered the technical trainings that we enrolled everyone in. So now I'll cover some of our results, starting with energy. When we applied to the grant with NYSERDA, we targeted a 3% reduction of energy usage on campus due to training. So on our campus utilities are Con Ed electricity, district steam and chilled water, which we purchased from New York Presbyterian Hospital, and some limited natural gas for one offsite building. Between our baseline and our final year, we achieved a 4% reduction in electricity, a 1% increase in district steam, 25% reduction in chilled water, and 15% reduction in natural gas. So while we didn't meet the target for district steam, I think we definitely exceeded our goals everywhere else. And just a caveat is that the final year overlapped a little bit with the COVID timeframe. So I did my best to adjust for COVID and any energy efficiency projects we accomplished during this timeframe as well. It changed the numbers slightly, but of course, just want to say that a campus is not a controlled study, so it's hard to account for everything in these energy numbers. Next slide, please. Thanks. Next is energy culture. And this is really where I think our biggest achievement, though hardest to quantify, was. Over the past 2 years, our department has met regularly with our coaches at Urban Green and through biweekly energy team meetings and through just working on a lot of different projects and initiatives together. So I think one of the best ways to illustrate how we've grown is to talk about 2 really successful projects that came as a result, not from me, but from suggestions by the team. First was a project suggested by our team member, Ron, to implement nighttime setback in an ambulatory care building. This is something that had bothered Ron for some time, that the terminal units never shut down at night. Another issue was that the building had 7 headered air handling units. There were 50,000 CFMs each, huge. And the intent for these air handlers when the building was constructed was to ramp up and down on their own and stage on and off automatically at night. But the code operating them was flawed and caused all sorts of unstable operations. So just over time, our central plant got used to running them constantly, 5 or 6 out of the 7 running, 24/7, 365. Well, thanks to Ron kind of bringing it up, we worked with a talented engineering firm to implement completely new BMS code on the air handling units and the terminal units that allowed for proper staging, automatic staging without manual intervention. And now we're running at, I think, last I heard, 2 air handlers a night, and we're trying to drop it down further. So that's just incredible. And I stole a graph from the engineering firm working with us on this. This is for the cooling energy reduction. Of course, we also have fan and heating savings as well. And you can see the blue is where we were at before. The green is where we are now. The red line was what our original target was. So this project is probably going to end up saving around $100,000 a year in utilities from this project alone. And with the Con Ed incentive that we applied for and just recently got, it's going to be less than a 1-year payback. So this is an awesome project we're really proud of. Next slide, please. The other project example was not really about energy, but related water conservation. So at the same time, our team enrolled in the New York City DEP Water Challenge, which was challenging colleges and universities to drop their water consumption by 10% over, I think, 2 years. And as part of this, we created a water conservation team. And this team, pictured here, met biweekly, and we implemented a lot of projects suggested by the plumbing staff, such as low flush toilet replacements, and critically, a timer project on autoclave equipment that alone saved 18 million gallons of water a year, which is just insane. So we definitely met our 10% water reduction goal. And again, these were all team suggestions. Next slide, please. So, we just improved a lot of areas, more best practices sharing, better onboarding. And I'll end on an anecdotal improvement is that we've as a team, gotten a lot better at not relying on BMS overrides. So it used to be before this grant that mechanics would get calls that a room's too hot or cold, and they just override the set points higher or lower, and maybe it would solve the issue temporarily, maybe it wouldn't. But of course, if you override a room's set point, then maybe you're not maintaining your temperature deadband. That room's never setting back at night, so you're losing efficiency there. Not to mention, most of the time there's an underlying undiagnosed issue. So maybe the temperature sensor is drifted. Maybe the actuator is broken. Maybe someone's got a space heater and it's right underneath the thermostat. So what we'd see in our work order data is that mechanics would return to a space over and over and over again for the same sorts of calls. And it'd always be for, the same complaint that clearly never really got diagnosed to begin with. They were just kind of putting Band-Aids on it with manual overrides. So during this training grant, the supervisors really emphasized that overrides were not a solution. They're a tool, a troubleshooting tool, but they're not a solution. And anytime we found equipment locked in overrides, the supervisor would have to speak to the employee to understand why they left it there, what issue it was, and just reinforce that overrides are really not an acceptable mechanism for solving issues. It was kind of onerous, but the mechanics have a better understanding now, I think, of the negative energy impact of locking things in the BMS system. And now our controls team checks regularly for these sorts of things. And we really see many fewer override requests in the BMS system. So I think that's maybe not a very sexy anecdote, but a really meaningful one for our department.
And I think, Angela, just to add on that override, that conversation between the supervisor and the sort of field mechanic often would create opportunity for that mechanic to tell us about a larger underlying condition, which was driving him to the need to override that every day. So it wasn't always just stop putting this in override. It was often identifying a larger problem. So. Yep.
And this photo is most of the members of our energy team that meets bi-weekly. Matt here is holding the Excellence in Action Urban Green Award that we just got in the mail. We took this photo a few days ago. And Mike is holding the Con Edison incentive check that we got for the nighttime setback project I talked about earlier.
Holding it very tightly.
Yeah.
We have one more slide, is that correct? So, listen, I'll stop by saying this. I did not type this, but when this came to our attention, February 4th, 2020, on Indeed, that somebody that works here added this comment: there is no cons here. If there is something you don't know, they will teach you and work with you. They will pay you for your training. Pay is good and benefits are great. I just think this, listen, this coupled with customer service in a high performing building is ultimately the target and the goal. So we were just flattered to see this. I did not type this. I'm not sure. I haven't accounted for Angela. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you.
Thank you guys for that informative and brief presentation. We appreciate it. There was a lot of information that we wanted to show you guys today. So there are a few questions being put up. We appreciate that. Keep them coming. And in the meantime, I want to just add a little bit of an outside perspective. When we got there and we met this team, we did these extensive interviews, and there were some things that were really astounding. Now, the main campus that Mike and Angela have been talking about are 6 buildings put together. One's brand new, the others were existing. And when you're in hospitals where you walk up a ramp to reach the floor of the next building. So imagine all the mechanical systems were like that too. One of the mechanics we talked to said he had been there 2 years and was still finding new pieces of equipment he'd never seen before. So this is an extreme example of, having to share internal information, and they really just didn't have a way to do it. So that was something we really focused hard on. And it's interesting from the outside because, the energy team that they just showed you a picture of, we'd meet every, 2 weeks or every month or whatever it ended up being. But there were times where, for example, we chased down some repeat calls, for example, to see what are the kinds of things that the mechanics are going to over and over again that aren't getting solved, right? And and the end, it just got answered very quickly, and we're like, okay, move on. But from the supervisors, they were astounded because they never had meetings like that. They never had like the cross-departmental discussion where one person knew the critical piece of information that the other person needed to know. So just the act of collaborating itself turned into those great projects that Angela mentioned at, in her presentation. And the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, like there was already an interest in energy efficiency that folks that had taken GPRO, they loved it. They were like super psyched about trying to save energy. And when we launched the Learning Lab, we had our meeting in there. It was an hour. Everyone showed the bits and pieces that they did. And we're like, okay, bye. And nobody left. They wouldn't leave. I'm like, well, we kind of have to like do some other things. We kind of have to go. And they wanted to show us every single thing because the folks who worked there built this thing and they were just so proud of it. And it was really, it really goes to, I think, the importance of leveraging the internal expertise that teams like this have. Okay, so now we have some questions. 3 people said, or 3 people voted up the comment that how great the virtual tour is. And yes, Angela, awesome. So thank you very much. So there's a question, now that the project is over, what is the plan to continue the training going forward? Will new staff get onboarded with in-house training or external training? No, that's actually a requirement of the NYSERDA grant to show how you will extend training. So do you guys want to talk about that?
I'll take a stab. Yeah, I mean, just sort of our intentions and kind of how we're, rolling it out. So we had that I had one slide that just showed sort of sections of technical training, but there's other sections in there. And I talked about in an earlier slide, the human resources training, safety training. So whenever we onboard somebody, there's just this sort of slew of sort of activity that they require, fire safety training, just to kind of, just part of the onboarding process. So our sort of first year of onboarding is usually heavily that with a basic level of BMS training, very basic sort of computer skills. And then we want to see some commitment out of them that they're going to go and get all the required certificates of fitness. And then we kind of move into the technical training program. And we've kind of broken it up. We have 3 types of sort of levels of technicians here, sort of helper level, sort of general level, and specialist level. And then we kind of broke up all those trainings and those training categories. So at a helper level, this is the minimum amount you're required to move on to sort of a 4 level and then to a 5 level. So it helps us sort of onboard somebody even at a sort of an entry level and kind of move them up through the ranks into the sort of specialist level at a much quicker rate. It also helps us sort of at that point where we're trying to look at how are we going to fill a vacancy? Are we going to promote from within? Or do we want to go to external? And it's really sort of helping the supervisors sort of check those boxes. And sort of, I think it helps us sort of take somebody that, if they don't get stuck halfway in the process here, it helps us bring them right from an entry level sort of mechanic with a base level technical training and maybe base level sort of experience right through an experienced mechanic just over maybe a matter of 3 to 5 years.
Right. And another thing that we talked about was resurveying folks after a couple of years, because the survey itself was an interesting process. Again, we went into it thinking we're just going to get this data across the team, but the underlying value of it was that folks would tell us stuff that they wouldn't tell Mike, and Mike wouldn't think to ask. So we interviewed, I think, 9 of the supervisors, and I think 5 of them said, look, we're spending all of our time putting out fires. Like, we don't have time to do these proactive energy projects. We know what they are. We want to do them. We just don't have time to do them. So a good bit of our work was then, okay, well, where are we, where's the time being wasted? I mean, it wasn't wasted. It was, people were working, but it was like, how can we use time more efficiently? And some of the things that Mike and Angela showed you in the presentation, they didn't explicitly say it, but the process improvements just saved so much time that they could then turn their focus to things that they really wanted to do. All right, so we have a question from Dominique, a former member of this energy team. So I'm super glad you're on this presentation. And the question is, have you noticed that occupants are more understanding of the temperature standards in the name of energy and carbon reduction? So Angela, do you want to talk about that?
Hey, Dominique. It's a little hard to say. I will say that I think we've gotten way better at explaining the temperature set point standard and especially helping our mechanics explain it. So Urban Green helped us create a nice training presentation and also a nice formal version of a flow chart all about troubleshooting hot and cold calls. And parts of the flow chart are explaining to the occupant, we have our temperature standard on our website printed out, show it to the occupant, talk them through it, explain what it is, see if there's an underlying issue. And so I think because we have these discussions with our mechanics, they're much better at explaining our temperature standards to occupants. I'm not present for those meetings, so I can't speak to whether those conversations are what the tone of it is. I think I just get the calls when they escalate past them to the supervisor to me. So, so I get those kinds of conversations, but I don't really see kind of the initial introduction of the temperature set point standard.
Right. So being very diplomatic. And because when we got there was a lot of frustration on the part of the mechanics, because the way they described it, they would go into a room and be like, this room is just set too hot. Why do you have it like this? And it was just it wasn't landing well with the residents, with the occupants and the researchers. So separately during the interview process, a bunch of the folks would say like, and our job is so thankless. Nobody ever says thank you. And one of them said, I love my job. Everybody thanks me all the time. We're like, well, what are you doing differently? What's going on here? And it was the kind of thing where this particular supervisor would, tell people in advance, like, this is when I expect this to be finished, or here's the backup information that, tells you why I'm doing X, Y, and Z or whatever. So like, this was not rocket science. And this was like a no cost solution other than, the freedom based on this grant to be able to sit down and talk about these things and convey, these customer service skills to the rest of the team. And it seems to have worked very, very well. Let's see. So there's a question from Alan Englander. Are there any plans to offer people from outside Cornell Weill the use of this training system?
Outside of our sort of workforce?
Yeah, I'm assuming they mean the learning lab, and I can answer.
Yeah. No, I would say there's no immediate plans on that. It really hasn't. It's not something we've thought about at all. If somebody wanted to come by and see it for any particular reason, or we have friends and partners in neighboring institutions, we'd be happy to do that. But it's just not something we've really thought about or planned at this time.
Yeah, it's meant for internal training. That said, there's the next application deadline for NYSERDA upon 3715 is May 20th, I think. And Caitlin will put up our email addresses in the chat, and you can reach out to Liz or me at Urban Green, and we can, talk about if your organization is a good fit to apply.
I think our hope in doing this presentation is that we could inspire some folks on the call if they're like us in the facilities world. The grant, as I mentioned earlier, is really flexible. I think it's meant to adapt to your individual needs, your individual vision. So this is just how we interpreted it, how we thought it would be helpful for our team. And, if it's helpful, we're happy to talk about that too. I hope people really do look at the grant. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Angela, can you tell us a little bit more about the overall culture shift that you saw? Whenever we've spoken privately, you always have such good stories. Like what have you seen among the staff?
Well, I guess in addition just to the recommendations I'm getting from staff, I get approached a lot more now by just team members who've noticed things that they think are wrong in the field. A lot of conditions of simultaneous heating and cooling that they've spotted and that they know are wrong and that they want to see if I can help fix. A lot of questions about whether, hey, we're going to replace this equipment. Is there a more energy efficient version of this? And then also a lot of engagement because we're starting to do some of these larger energy conservation projects like that I just mentioned on the slide. And we're trying to put a big focus on training and engage everybody so that, they appreciate how the energy savings are coming and they understand how to maintain these systems going forward. So I think there's a lot of really great dialogue that's happening now. Yeah, that just makes me really happy. It's kind of hard to put numbers around it, but just, I think if we did that survey again and we asked if you know who to give your energy savings ideas to, hopefully 100% of people this time will say yes, so.
For sure. And Angela, you talked a little bit about the chilled water reduction. Did you fully answer the question? How did you achieve the 25% chilled water reduction? Just want to see if there's any more details about that.
Yeah, I can't account for 100% of it. I'm sure some of it is through training, but for example, part part of it, I think, is through fuel switching of one building. One building is steam-driven absorption chillers. And while one of them was being retrofitted, we were importing chilled water from the hospital. So I think there was a little bit of fuel switching between the district steam and the chilled water there, but I couldn't really break it out perfectly. So I think that's part of it. But, part of it's also just changes in the way that we operate our air handlers. So we have a fault detection diagnostic system that's been installed on some parts of the campus, and that's been spitting out indications of when we're using excess chilled water in our air handlers, things like that.
Great, thank you. And this is a question from Mike. It's a question from Corey Letcher.
Hi, Corey.
He asks, have you started to internally market the impacts of the programs you're implementing to raise awareness about the legislative pressures that you will be facing, such as Local Law 97, and et cetera? We've talked about that a lot. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So I'm sorry, so have we used the program to market towards that, or?
This is the programs, the momentum that you've already established to,
yes and no. We were actively involved in, a lot of the early on sort of Local Law 97 various reviews, and I think we gave a lot of our opinions and our sort of input process. Not so much of late since the regulations actually passed. So we do have a sort of internal communications with our sort of political affairs teams and things like that. It is definitely daunting and something that's a concern for us. And, I think our sort of, what we're hoping for the training program, and what I really try to emphasize with my team is to stop looking at this regulation as pass fail. If you can cut your carbon footprint in half and still fall short of the goals, it's a success story. So we're just sort of driving forward and doing everything we can. We have other sort of projects in place to help drive that sort of number down against the Local Law 97 requirements. But we're trying not to look at it as a pass fail sort of a situation.
It is one of my goals to kind of help with the broader sustainability culture and the institution as a whole. We're kind of unique. We're a medical college, so I think we're different from other college campuses that have broad undergraduate and graduate programs. There'll often be sustainability clubs or sustainability programs or majors. Here, we're very focused on the medical. So I think, that's one difference between us and other college campuses. But that's actually, engaging users is something that in the back of my head, I hoped we would be able to get to with the grant, but it just, we were so focused on the technical skills. That's really what sucked up our time. That is something that I would like to work on in the future. And I know we would like to promote some of these internal energy conservation projects we've recently just closed out. So that's something Mike and I will work with our marketing team on, see if we can make some case study language.
Yeah,
and, soon people in New York City are going to think more and more about energy efficiency in the buildings that they live and work in. We already have energy grades everywhere. Not too many people know, average people not in our industry know about Local Law 97, but I think that will change in the coming years.
Yeah, and then another thing that Mike and I talked about over time, which is one of the rationales behind the Excellence in Action Award, was to try to stimulate the kind of enthusiasm that the E&M team had in other departments that affect energy, right? Like bidding for construction projects and the types of vendors they use or whatever. And it's really, anyone that works in energy efficiency knows it's an organization-wide process, right? And that this kernel of enthusiasm and success was so great, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to expand to the rest of the organization. So there's, it's still working.
And just to add, it's definitely, the regulatory environment is definitely something our senior leadership is aware of. We just haven't hit that sort of in the field customer base to the extent we want to. But we have made a lot of progress with and partnered with our sort of construction capital planning designs team. We have am I drawing a blank? Not requirements. We have our standards, our design standards, and we're just so much more involved now in the design process and reviews, working with the consultants. It can be a bit of a struggle at times. It's always a struggle when you're comparing sort of budgets with requirements, but that is definitely one area that has been a positive improvement as part of this as well.
That's great. There's a question from Ingrid Wygand. I find that Angela will like this question a lot. find that people complain about being too hot or too cold without actually having a thermometer. So the complaint is subjective and can vary hugely at a given temperature. I asked them to get a room thermometer and report back. How do you deal with that?
We changed the digital display on their no, I'm just kidding.
It's something I try to explain a lot to the design engineering architects and consultants we work with a lot, because I think we talk about this a lot, and they don't work in the facilities side, so they may not always see the epic thermostat battles that happen on a campus. The classic example that I think our set point standard helped with was you'd have like two people in the same office, and one person runs hot and one person runs cold, and each would put in work orders to adjust the temperature set point. And previously the mechanic would just every time they got a work order, they just bring it up or down a little bit, try to keep one person happy and then make the other person unhappy. So one thing was just publishing our set point standard and making it publicly available and showing the reasoning why. It helps our buildings function efficiently. We have these sustainability goals, we have regulatory requirements. So that's definitely part of it. Another thing that we do, I don't know if everyone else can do or wants to do this, is like we just don't have temperature readouts on the thermostats. Like they're blank. They just send the signal directly to the building management system. And then I think a tool that we find really helpful in trying to be understanding of the users is the ASHRAE Thermal Standard 55, which really documents the various things that can have an impact on how an occupant feels. So it could be their metabolic rate, it could be their activity, they're sitting or they're walking around doing research. It could be the biggest culprit on our campus is draft. Are they located right under a diffuser and above a certain velocity of air? People do feel uncomfortable. So I think that temperature standard can be really helpful in training employees about what to look for and giving the occupants the benefit of the doubt. That being said, there are always people who are kind of never happy. So that's a challenge of the facilities world.
Just to add to that, and that temperature standard, that documented temperature standard has been so helpful, and it just helps me just responding to say maybe a department chair or somebody that's speaking for somebody else as to why we can't adjust their temperature. I'll copy the standard, I'll reference the code, I'll reference the section. It just brings a little more sort of depth to the response, other than just, sorry, we can't do that, we just don't allow that. And I think well over 90% success with those types of responses. Angela, I don't know if you feel differently.
I think only the toughest cases make it my way. So,
thank you, guys. A question about how do you determine what staff training should be mandatory versus voluntary, and does the staff still have a preference?
I'm sorry, is that mandatory versus voluntary training?
Yeah. Do they get to pick, or who picks for them?
Well, so there's certain mandatory trainings, like I said, that sort of falls out of the sort of technical training. Let's just forget human resources and environmental safety and all that. That's so important, but that's basically mandatory. And then we basically have sort of mandatory. We have two groups of trainings. I call them sort of a list of technical trainings that you should need to take one of these at a minimum, one of these like sort of every 6 months or every year. Then we have this sort of technical elective group, which is really the voluntary. So we want to make sure that folks, sometimes we find out about a great training class because somebody comes to us and tells us they want to take it. So it's both. It's a mixture of both, right? So the basic level BMS and maybe a slightly advanced level BMS, that's kind of a requirement. If you want to be a mechanic here at Weill Cornell, there's certain sort of understandings you need to have, especially with our IT-based systems. So those are mandatory. But once you kind of get through all that, it really is a voluntary-based technical training. You're required to take at least one significant technical training each year, and it's a great tool for somebody to add as a goal in an annual performance appraisal.
Okay, and so the last question, actually, I'm going to take the first shot at that. Of what surprised you the most? The thing that surprised me the most was how excited everyone was to create trainings. Because in my past history as in this job, people would say, we're plumbers, we're not trainers, we're electricians, we're not trainers. And this staff they had like 26 ideas right off the bat just to make internal trainings to convey information to one another. So what were the most surprising things to the two of you?
I think the most surprising thing to me, well, I really love the sort of ties that we're saying. You had talked about earlier, the response in your interviews with the supervisors and the field techs gave me such incredible input. So that was one of the most valuable things to me. But what I love the most about the training end of it was some of our staff, like you said, plumbing, one of our plumbers, Byron, just kind of created his own training on how to clear, and Justin on how to clear sort of certain, using certain sort of drain cleaning equipment, and we videotape these. So some folks really fully embraced it. They wanted to be involved. They created their own sort of slide decks and that kind of thing to train it. So we had internal training internal technicians.
And Angela, how about you? Any big surprises for you?
I think that was the coolest thing, was just everyone, the people who were really excited to develop trainings. Like Mike just mentioned, the plumbing clog training, like Justin literally created this whole setup with all these transparent pipes, and with all these different connections and curves, and then he actually like made a clog in it and like stuffed a rag down it, and then showed folks how to use the snake. And that was part of the training, was like having people come up and practice trying to get it out the clog. And because it was transparent, they could actually see if they were making progress or if they had bypassed the clog and like were going into another part of the pipe. So that was really cool.
That's awesome. And this project really did achieve the goals that we set out to achieve, and we're all really proud of it. So again, if your organization is interested in participating in a project like this, contact me or Liz Thomas at Urban Green. It generally ends up being no out-of-pocket costs for the organization, other than the cost share of the time spent to get things up and running and doing all of the trainings. And Caitlin already put our contact information in the chat.